time for another live episode of the In Ring Wrestling Podcast. Whether you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or you're joining us here live in the studio, we welcome you. I'm Kevin Kelly, along with the host, Casey Thompson. Casey has a couple of new additions this week. My, oh my, that is a mighty sweet-looking sleeveless shirt you got on there, my friend.
Oh, the in-ring jersey, yes.
We're going to have our own merch here very soon. And the reason
Yes,
that that
yours is coming in Florida Gator colors, right?
ugh,
Yeah, I know.
bleh,
I know. You like the what is it? Garnet
it's not
and
garden,
gold?
garnet and
Garnet
gold of Florida
Garnet
State.
and
Yes.
gold. That's right.
Yeah, baby. And the reason that Casey is wearing that sweet looking sleeveless shirt is because he's got a new sleeve. Look at that. Oh man, look at that beautiful artwork.
Oh, yes.
How long did that take?
Um, I got the first half a couple months ago. Right when my son got it for me for Christmas, and then my girl got me the extension for my birthday. The first part took about 6 hours. The second part, uh, we started at 1, finished around 6 o'clock, but he took a lot of breaks, took his time and stuff like that. So, never in a hurry. You would thought he worked for the county. His, owns My buddy owns in Pompano Beach, Florida, owns Funhouse Tattoos. His name is Casper, and he went down there in that area, get a tattoo, tell him that Casey sent you from the In Ring Wrestling Podcast, and he does great work. So it was a quite a weekend. We got back. We went down for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Went down and stayed in Deerfield Beach on the beach and did the tattoo. Saw my son, did the family stuff and things like that. It was all good. Got back and just waiting to go live with you, Kevin.
Yeah, baby.
The
So I
highlight
had
of my weekend.
oh, of course. Well, I had a great. I'm inviting people into the stream here if they want to join us.
Nice.
Um, so I'm sending out the link. Oh man. So I just happened to click onto Facebook to send this link out, and the first thing that's there is my 40th high school reunion is 1 month away.
Wow.
Oh, I'm
And you went to high
so
school in Stewart?
Stewart, Florida, Martin County High School class of 1985.
Oh, 85. You're a little bit older than me. I'm class of 1990.
It was a great school and fun to go to, and I had a lot of great memories. But man, I haven't been back since, and have no interest to go back. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm the same way. When I leave, I don't turn back or I don't look behind me. I just go straight ahead.
Yeah, it's just see you later. We had so Bob Evans and I had another fun day and night last night. We were in Horse's Head, New York, which is just
Wow.
over the state line.
Okay.
Um, so did you ever do WWF TV in upstate New York in either like Glens Falls or Binghamton or any of those towns?
I don't think so.
That would have been a
Um,
long, long trip for you.
yeah, yeah,
So we were just
exactly.
to the west of Binghamton last night. Horse's Head is near Elmira, Corning, those types of towns,
Is that
and
by Ithaca or is that
it
wrong?
close. No, I think
Okay.
it's all close.
Okay.
I might be wrong, but it feels like it's close. As I, went up, I passed Bucknell University, and then
Okay.
went through Williamsport, where my son Cameron's going to be going to school starting in the fall,
Excellent.
and it was a lot of fun. We went there for Excite Wrestling. HC Loke has the training center there, along with Sean Carr, and it's an interesting scenario, and it's some good advice, I think, for people looking for space, especially where there's some, and especially in the northeast, there's a lot of like shopping malls that are on their ass, and they're
Right.
in,
Yeah.
in areas where people are moving out or not as frequent shoppers. So this old mall that's there, it's still really nice inside, but they've rented the Macy's, and not the
Oh,
entire
nice.
Macy's because it's a gigantic store, but just a small part of it. And they have a little studio set up, and they have 3 rings set up for training. They got more room than they need,
Wow.
and it's a very comfortable atmosphere. They got couches and all kinds of stuff, but it's in a retail space, and I have a feeling that we're gonna see more and more of that with independent wrestling and with the change in retail moving away from brick and mortar, moving more to online.
Right.
And there'll be just more opportunities to, have events and shows in a big building, in a public location. Can't ask for it. The bus line runs right there. But we had a
Well,
great
there you
time
go.
for Excite Wrestling. We did a seminar during the day, and then we were there for the show at night. It was great. There was a wrestler that I hadn't seen or thought about in so long. Forgot how good he was. His name's Channing Decker. He's
Okay.
from Toronto, and he's one of the mainstays, like in Greektown Wrestling and a bunch of different independent companies up there. He had a Friday booking, he had a Sunday booking, and he had an opportunity for Saturday, and he was able to get on the Excite card. Man, he's good.
Nice.
Holy mackerel! I forgot. I when I saw him, I was like, "Gosh, that guy looks familiar." And I said to Bob, "Is that Channing Decker?" And he goes, "Yeah." I
Oh, wow.
literally haven't seen him in 15 years, and hasn't aged a bit. In great shape. Tremendous, tremendous wrestlers. So any of the fans, of course, we get a lot of people watching this from Canada. Make sure you're checking out these local promotions that are there. I know that Greektown does a lot of business. So that was a
That's
lot of
where it
fun.
all starts for
Yeah.
that's where it all starts, you know? You gotta get in there, you gotta get in front of people. It doesn't matter
hmm
if it's 10 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, you gotta learn your craft, you know? Put the time in.
So we, of course, a couple of weeks ago, we had the great Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, Dwayne Bruce on our program. And when WCW folded and everything looked like it was going to be bleak, we asked him, well, what did you do for work? Because you had been a wrestler for so long. And he told
Right.
us that he had always kept his finger, he had always stayed close in the construction industry. He had worked
Yeah.
in construction before he got into wrestling and was able to jump back into it when WCW folded and has continued to work in the construction industry ever since. And that got me thinking, Casey,
Mhm.
I want to know
Oh,
what some of these jobber jobs were. I want to
wow.
know and you've talked about some of the other things that you've done while you were running all over the country and wrestling at home in Florida, but, picking
Yeah.
up a shift here or a shift there, trying to do something. I was trying to think like of some of the enhancement guys, some of the in-ring wrestling talent. What did they do for outside employment to, feather the nest if the wrestling bookings were not as plentiful?
Man, construction is or always was easy revenue because you got paid decent money. You're out in the sun, so you're getting a little color. You're doing construction, so it's physical manual labor. So like I did construction before, I did masonry work with block and brick, more block than anything. So you're picking up those center blocks all over the place. It's so you're just use them to help. Work on your body and everything. I've seen a lot of construction. I worked with these two brothers. You might have remembered them, John and Scott Allen. They're both gone. Actually, I think if I tell you this one time, I think Eddie Mansfield did a show in St. Cloud, I think at the St. Cloud Civic Center,
Right.
and John and Scott wrestled each other. And I think the finish was a pile driver off the top rope.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
Yeah, so John and Scott, they rode with us a lot, did a lot of TV together. When I talk about my first time with the WWF in '91, they were the ones I were referring to that I rode with. Their dad was a part owner of a cabinet shop, making
Okay.
cabinets and stuff like that. So all three at one point, all three of us worked there. So we'd go do TV on Monday, Tuesday for WCW, drive straight through, go straight to work, and you know Wednesday, Thursday, and then we off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, wrestling again, Monday, Tuesday. So we're wrestling 5 days a week, but we're still working. And if we have an off week, we just, we say, hey, we got this week off. They're real flexible with our hours and stuff like that. I've seen guys work at grocery stores. A lot of guys work at nightclubs and strip clubs bouncing
Yes.
and think, because it's late night flexible. Working the some of the clubs, you could go, work a independent show, and still you don't start work till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night because they're open till 5, 6 in the morning. So they'll go and wrestle, and then they come back and go and work their night at the club. Still, I
Uh,
remember working. I remember working in strip clubs when down the street you had the Warlord working at one.
damn.
He worked at one. I worked at one right down the street. And I remember back in the day, remember Ron and Don Harris?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Ron and Don worked at two strip clubs in Orlando, and we're all friends. Used to all hang out in the parking lot, and that those times I was actually driving a taxi cab in Orlando.
Wow. How was
Yeah,
that?
uh, man, I've always told people how HBO had that taxi cab confessions and all that.
Yes.
If you go 100 times more into it and crazy and intense and bizarre, that was my nightly deal. Every time it was just the craziest thing you've ever seen. I've seen everything you could imagine, whatever anything, amplify it by 100 times, 100x, and that's what it was. It was the craziest bizarre. I made really good money. I drove in the bad area, the hood,
Yeah.
and I was known as the crazy white guy because
Oh,
I'd go
okay.
pick up, I'd go to, I'd pass the house, put it in reverse, go 60 miles an hour, slam on the brakes. They'd come get in there, and we go. And there's no GPS back in those days. You had to take a test and know all the landmarks, and you had to look it up in a an atlas because I I told a lot of the guys, I said, what would you guys do nowadays when you go to a show, you put the address in your phone, you Google it or whatever, and you have Siri, GPS, whatever, and you just it takes you. My day, and I'm sure you're the same way as some extent, Kevin. We had to have the road atlas. You're like, hey, you have the
Right.
road atlas, and if we didn't have the road atlas, you're screwed, unless you knew the way. And you'd have to have one guy that was actually the co-pilot who would raid. I remember I was doing a show in Mississippi. This one dude got me booked in Mississippi. I was last minute. I'm like, all right, cool. It was a great payday, well worth going. I was picking up this one local kid, and I'm like, got in there, and so we're going. I'm like, you got the atlas? And he's like, no. I'm like, bro. I'm like, oh, come on, bro. And then so I was, we'll figure it out. So we're headed towards Mississippi. Then I come to realize that this dude was legally blind.
Oh
Okay.
my god.
He could not drive. And you might know who the kid is if I told you his name. He wrestled as Kevin Rhodes
Hmm.
down in Florida. He would tell people that Dusty was his relative. And
Oh, jeez.
so we get all the way there. Somehow I got us there. Okay. And I was pissed when we got there. I was beyond livid because I had to drive the whole trip with no map, no atlas, nothing like that. Right. So we get there. Guess who I had to work?
No. Kevin Rhodes.
2 days straight. Guess who went home by himself off that trip?
What?
I did.
You
He
left
didn't
him?
ride back with me. No, I just beat the shit out of him. I was so mad. I just killed him in the ring, and he rode with someone else back. He was all mad. I got you booked on the show and everything. I don't care, you know. So it was
Jesus,
just
man. That's awesome. And
yeah,
you're
man.
better off at that point just riding by yourself, right? Because what the hell? The guy can't ride anyway. He can't drive, so
yeah,
what's the point of having him? He can't
yeah.
navigate, he can't drive.
I remember coming back from up in Mississippi, Biloxi, or somewhere like that, and we're riding, and we're like, okay, listen, it's your time to drive. You're gonna go down, um, take 10. When you get up to 10, this is like, once again, let me reiterate to everyone, all these young kids and everything, no GPS.
Nope.
So either you knew the way or you're reading a map. And if you didn't know how to read a map, you're screwed. So we told the guy, I said, listen, everyone else is tired. Your turn to drive. Take 10. You're going to go take 10. You're going to go east till you hit 75. 75, you're going to go south. Okay. 75 will dead end right into the turnpike in Wildwood, Florida. Turnpike right into Orlando, where we were at the time,
Yeah, it's
And
easy.
we're like, don't go past 75 because if you end up in Jacksonville, you fucked up. You went too far. You went 95. Now we're an extra hour and a half around, the state to get back to Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all sleeping. And I'm like, I hear Casey, Casey. I'm like, what? He said, I think I fucked up.
Oh no.
And he's like, I'm like, what? He's like, is saying we're coming in Jacksonville. I hear someone in the back,
Oh.
you stupid motherfucker, just screaming at him. Because just the three brothers in there, we had to go work at the cabinet shop. So now we're going to be late. No big
Yep.
deal. We didn't care anyhow. So we pulled over to get some food and everything. He's like, oh, I'm good. When you guys need to drive, I'm tired. And we're like, no, 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 no. You screwed up. You're doing the driving still. You keep driving. And so we
Right.
made him drive the rest of the way back and everything. But yeah, it was bizarre. I mean, everyone that have any kind of job, back to your saying about the jobs and everything, any kind of job, because when wrestling, remember I talked about Paul Orndorff, I used to help book enhancement guys for
Yeah.
when they were in Florida, and Paul would text me on the pager at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, I need three more guys in the morning. Hey, Paul, these guys work. And he'd just scream and say, do they want to be wrestlers or what? They better get them there. And I'm like, all right, no problem. I always came through for them. So you would have to have a job that had flexibility.
Right.
I actually worked at Winn Dixie and
That was my
full
first
time
job.
employee. Was it? Yeah.
First job.
And I worked at Winn Dixie, and the manager I knew from the gym. So he was a buddy of mine, and he told any department head, whatever his schedule he needs, figure it out. He'll tell you what he can work, and if he needs to switch at the last second, make it happen. That's, you don't really have big jobs like that accommodating you,
No.
but and it was really weird because you would be like have your red apron on, stocking the frozen food, and someone like walk by looking at you and like, hey, did I see you on TV? And like, nope, nope, not me.
Nope, not me. I know.
So, but it was
So you mentioned like working as a bouncer, working at the strip clubs. A friend of mine, Paul Lazenby, who of course is an actor in Hollywood, who's a wrestler of some regard, up from Winnipeg. He's friends with Chris Jericho. He's friends with Don Callis and Lance Storm. He broke in with those
mhm.
guys. And Lazenby, of course, was an MMA fighter and has now gone. He was Stone Cold Steve Austin's body double. He's done a bunch of
Oh
acting
wow.
for years. Paul Lazenby was also, as he was supporting his wrestling habit, his bodybuilding habit, or his MMA career, he was a bouncer. And he wrote two books, When We Were Bouncers and then When We Were Bouncers Too. And it was not just his stories, but it was stories from other famous people who had been
Oh yeah.
wrestlers or bouncers or something. And Casey, you please chime in because it seemed like a lot of those stories began with I was there minding my own business when all of a sudden some drunk guy came out and decided that he was going to try to find out who was tougher, him or me. And
Yeah,
every
yeah.
story pretty much ended the same way with the local tough being, knocked out cold and the cops
Here's a good
grabbing him and scooping him up.
yeah, here's a good rule of thumb. 99% of the time, the bouncer always wins. One, because they're not supposed to be drunk
Right?
and you're fighting someone that's impaired. Okay. Two, there's not just usually one of them. There's many of them. I worked at a country bar in downtown Orlando called 8 Seconds.
Yep,
And on a Friday night, we'd have 3 to 4 thousand people come through the door. I remember the boys came in there, and Kurt Hennig was there, all the boys from WCW, and all the bouncers knew that I knew them and everything. Of course, they did what they do, and they got thrown out.
of
So they
course.
left. It was Kurt. I remember Kurt was the leader, the ringleader of them all, right? And
Shocker.
you'd have who was the other English guy in WCW? Not Steven Regal, Dave
Dave
Taylor.
Taylor.
Dave Taylor would always talk to me about, oh, these guys are always so sloppy, sloppy drunks, making fun of them and everything. So about 30 minutes later, I hear on the radio, hey, Sebastian, that was the head of security. All those wrestlers just came right back in. And so Kurt was the leader walking in. He's like, hey, man, what's going on? Hey, we went everywhere else, and this is the best place. So we came back. They were just thrown out, for doing something stupid, nothing
Right.
bad, just I've been thrown out of a lot of clubs, and usually Billy Kidman was the reason why we got thrown out of many of the clubs.
Billy Kidman.
Yeah, yeah, he'd always get in a fight or something stupid. So so they came back in the club and everything was cool after that. All was good and everything. But we had, many people. We had one of the American Gladiators worked there, which was man, I totally. A couple of them worked there. A couple of the female ones worked there.
Ah, very
But
cool.
like I was talking about the strip club where I got the job,
Yep.
the Incredible Thor. He was the manager,
Jeez.
so and down the street, about 2 blocks down the street, one of my real good buddies that I helped break in and travel with for a long time, MVP, now with AEW. He down the street, we closed at 4 o'clock. He closed place Goldfingers at 2 o'clock. He'd come over and hang out for a couple hours. And I remember a bunch of times, usually after 2 o'clock, that's when everything goes crazy. Because
Yep.
if you're out past 2 o'clock, you either hammered or on some kind of crazy drug or something.
Nothing
And
good happens
um,
after 2 o'clock in the morning.
absolutely. So he would be there. He had my back if something happened or anything. And we have my buddy that I worked with there. He is now the head of security for Metallica. He
Wow.
travels. Yeah, he travels the world with them. Whenever you see, what's their lead singer's name?
James
James.
Hetfield.
Whenever you ever see him, you'll see a big bald headed guy that kind of resembles me a little. That's my buddy Seth. He's right next to
Very
him
cool.
every single time.
You know,
Yeah, so I
listen,
mean,
we know that guys like, of course, Billy Gunn worked in construction and our pal Tilly worked in restaurants. Here's our friend Steve Oliveira who says Jeff Farmer worked at Bally's Fitness. Of course, he was the NWO
yep,
Sting. How about this name from the past? Isn't it cool to see Sick Boy Scott Vick? He worked at the GNC.
oh
And
wow,
while Scott was training at the power plant, or while Steve was training at the power plant, he worked security. So any number of jobs
yeah,
that can help support that wrestling habit. One big difference, of course, between then and now is I would imagine that a lot of wrestlers today either drive Uber or deliver food for DoorDash or something like that,
sure,
and that that
sure,
type
absolutely.
of that type of work is probably pretty prevalent.
Yeah,
What kind of
your own
money would you?
boss.
What kind of money? Yeah, what kind of money would you make at security at a strip club?
At a strip club, you'd
Yeah.
make good money because I worked the door, so I got paid. I think I got paid 100 a night, just um, just cash or on a check, and then the rest of it was tips. So I'm in one club I worked at, we got paid 50% on the books and 50% in cash.
Ah,
So it's cool, and then you tips from everyone. You'd be surprised how many people come in, shake your hand, and in that hand had $100 bill. Just because when they come in the door, be like, "Hey, come on in, man. How you doing?" I make them look good in front of their friends. They look like a big time, so they take care of you. Hey, I got you. Go right on in.
Yeah.
And it's just I learned how to become a really good worker by working in that business because those girls strictly work the customers, and I work the customers and I work the girls because I'm trying to make money from everyone. So when your pay and livelihood depends on it, you learn all the little gimmicks and everything to try to make some extra money. But to answer your question, um, at a strip club, it depends which level of on the food chain. Like, say you take someone like the Godfather out in Vegas, he's making hundreds of $1,000s a year.
Right.
Now, I was in the hundred of $1,000 a year. I would make, depending on how many days I worked and stuff like that, and if I was traveling. But most of the time, I would make any between 75 to 100,000 a year. Well, like when my kids got older, I stopped wrestling, stopped traveling and stuff like that. And because everything was about taking care of them. So I just worked full time and I was making at least $100,000 a year, which is great. But when you look at it, it's good for the moment, but there's nothing, no longevity there.
Right.
There's no retirement, anything like that. So it served its purpose. I was able to have the flexibility to make money when I wasn't on the road. And a lot of guys just sit home waiting for the next, their next date. I was like, if I'm home, I'm going to try to do something, make money. I did extra work in movies, in music videos. I've done all kinds of stuff just because, you know, time is money. I have time. I want to make some money. That's how I
Yeah.
looked at it.
Did you know anybody that was like a kept man? Did you know anybody that had like a, special benefactor, wink, wink, who might keep them around and make sure that they had everything that they needed? I always heard stories that type of arrangement or situation could happen. Like for example, Shawn Michaels. There was a rumor for years about Shawn Michaels that he was receiving, you know, whatever he needed money, he would be, taken care of, so to speak. Do you know anybody
who was
like
taking
that in
care
that
of who
situation?
was taking care of Sean.
Well, I'll have you know. Um, well, yeah, and listen, it was a um, if the guy believed that maybe Sean was into him or something like that, he might be willing to slip him a couple of bucks, and I think from what I was always told, Sean was able to slip and dip and dive and get out of those situations, but keep
Yeah,
that
so he makes
keep
them
that
think
train
there's
going.
something's gonna happen,
Yeah,
but never actually happens. But I would think that would be straddling the fence, straddling,
hey now,
the fence too too close for me.
yeah,
Too close for comfort for me. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of guys who would have a sponsor, you know, and it could be of the um heterosexual preference or the homosexual preference, whatever.
yep,
Just like you said, like allegedly Sean had something like that. I've seen a lot of guys have sponsors like that that would um take care of them, especially like in Memphis. They
really,
Yeah, I had some buddies who would talk about working in Memphis and everything, and when you get into you know arena rats and everything, groupies, you know, I don't know if they exist anymore like they did back in the day, but my buddy would be like, all right, I'll take the fat one. He said, we gotta find big ones because they're gonna feed you when you come to town. And I swear to God, because you're working Memphis for $40 a night and
yeah,
you got to get to the next town, you got to eat, you got to sleep. So you would find some sponsors along the way that would take care of you. They'd feed you well when you're there, and they would make food for you for the next day or two.
yeah,
And it was weekly towns, so you'd see them the next week, and they would give you a little gas money if you needed that too. So it's all
yeah. You
about making it.
relationship building.
Yeah, and it was all about doing what you had to do
Yeah,
to try to make it to the next level. And some people have done a lot of crazy things.
Yeah, I know in Japan, that there were a lot of great sponsors, and we would go out to sponsor dinners all the time. And the sponsors in Japan were kind of an extension of the fan club. A lot of them were in New
Okay.
Japan were members of the fan club, and through the fan club, they got to know people. They got to become friends with others in the fan club, and then they would invite a wrestler out for a dinner, as a thank you for all their hard work.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
so it was always very nice. And it was always a pleasure to get invited because then they would say, oh, please invite some wrestlers or some other people as well. And
Yeah.
so one of the Japanese boys would say, oh, please, Kevin san, come to dinner tonight, sponsor dinner. Oh, sure. That'd be awesome. And I'm not a drinker, so sometimes those became late nights, and I would be like, "Ah, I'm gonna take a cab and go home," and the sponsor would pay for the cab, and
Oh,
I
wow.
would be back to the hotel. But some of those would go on all hours
How many of
of the night.
those how many of those sponsors might have been in the mafia?
I think it was pretty prevalent back in the day, but again, that culture has
Has it
largely
changed?
gone. Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's way different now. The sponsors were constantly buying gifts for the wrestlers, and
Hmm.
we would see that all
Yeah.
the time. And it would be anything from like a kind of like a gift box with some treats, chocolate, candy, whatever. And then sometimes it would be clothing. The
Right.
biggest gift I ever heard of, and I didn't see it because he was leaving as I was coming in. Shinsuke Nakamura got like a $15,000 watch given to him
Oh,
by a
wow.
sponsor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Mm.
he was showing it in the locker room, and the boys were like, "Oh, that's a beautiful watch. How much did you pay?" "Oh, nothing." "Really?" "Yeah,
Mm.
sponsor." "Oh my gosh."
Yeah. Which sponsor was that?
Yeah, right? What's his name? But when Jushin Liger retired, he, kind of transferred his sponsor to some of the foreign boys, some of the foreign baby faces, so like Juice Robinson, David
Really?
Finlay at the time, because he wasn't on the road anymore and he wasn't gonna be, being asked out to eat, so Liger set it up to where, the other baby faces, the other Hontai members, and it happened to be foreigners, would be the ones that the sponsor would reach out to, get in contact with, and say, "Hey, we're putting together a big dinner. Would you like to come?" So I got invited to one of those, and it was during the G1, so it was like the hottest summer, the worst weather in late July and
Yeah.
August, like Florida hot and then some.
Mm.
And so we
Mm.
go out to dinner and everybody's drinking and I'm talking with some of the people. And some of them knew a little bit of English and some English was better than others so they would kind of help translate. And I noticed that these people had it was apparent that they had money just from the way they dressed, just from the gold that they had on, the watch, whatever it was.
Right.
And I was like, "How did you all become friends?" And they said, "Oh, through the fan club." "Oh, interesting." And then through the fan club, they all got each other into Amway, Amway in Japan.
Oh, really?
And these people got in like on the ground floor of Amway in Japan. So
Oh.
then they started bringing out like their phone and pictures. Here's us on vacation. Here's us at the awards banquet. Here's us on this incredible yacht. Here's my new car that I just bought. And I'm
Mm.
talking like, 80, $100,000 sports car. Here's this. Here's my home. And it was like these,
They're showing this to the boys,
yeah, me and the
the
boys. Well,
wrestlers.
Juice was
Wow, they must
over.
not realize that the boys are the biggest workers in the
I
business.
know,
I mean,
but
in the world.
it's not like it used to be though, Casey.
Okay.
That's what I was
Good, good.
thinking. And then I realized I'm there with Juice, who's just there to have a good time and just
Yeah.
drink his face off and then go away. And David Finley, who's married, of course, and has a baby, and he's coming from money anyway, so it's not anything he hasn't heard of before. But we laughed about that. It's like, man, if we wanted to, we could really get in good with these people and be cared for. But
Yeah.
it's like they were so that's how like in the United States, it was always very siloed. and there were fence
Mm.
builders, right?
Yeah.
So I know Tracy Smothers
Oh, yeah.
and Danny Doring. There was like in ECW, there was a book, and it was like all the rules, right? And the biggest rule was you can't be a fence builder. You can't build a fence around your rat. And so, but this was sort of like, spread the wealth, and because of kayfabe being strong in Japan, the office would get upset if baby faces and heels were at the same sponsored dinner. And the fans were
Okay.
kind of smart, but not really smart. So we would make sure that if they're, oh, Sashin, take picture. Yeah, sure. We would make sure that,
Everyone was
yeah, the heel is out of the picture, or if the heel
right.
is taking the picture with us and the fan, oh, please don't post to SNS, to social network sites.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, no problem. But and then every once in a while, there would be, oh, the office is mad at so and so. Why? What happened? Oh, sponsored dinner, picture got out. Shit. So,
Wow.
and there were a couple of sponsors that the boys were told, don't go out with them. It's no good, because maybe their business may not have been what you might call legal. And so
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
office kind of watched out for the boys in that regard. I'm choking
Wow.
tonight. What's going on? Um,
Mm.
but again, and I know, like, didn't Bob Holly, so of course his first WWF gimmick was Sparky Plug, and he
Yeah.
was the race car driver, but he actually drove cars. I mean,
Oh, really?
that's what he was doing. He was a wrestler and a race car driver.
So when he had
So
a meeting with Vince, he was like, "Yeah, I was," because Vince always asks what your hobbies or what you like, and he never thought being a race car driver, he was gonna be a spark plug out of all that.
right? But that's the kind of the way that it can go. And everybody who, and look at, Test, for example, Andrew Martin. He
Yeah.
was brought into WWF. He was led in by Bret Hart, who recommended him highly. And the conversation with Andrew Martin was, well, what have you done? What kind of jobs have you done? And he had done a lot of bouncing and was a roadie and had done all kinds of things in the rock and roll world. So that's where they came up with Test, the guy who would go to the microphone, test, 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 right? But it was
Oh,
also
yeah.
double entendre because everybody knew he was on the gas. So
Yeah.
they
Hey,
tickled themselves by
talk
coming up with that one.
talking about I was talking to someone the other day, and they had, like, that large group of guys, I think it was, like, in '96, like, when Tracy
Yep.
Smothers and they had Wild Bill Irwin was a ice hockey player.
Right.
Do you know much about their contracts? Because
Yes.
I believe they got correct me if I'm wrong, their downside guarantee, they're guaranteed 10 dates a year at $150 was their downside guarantee, right?
I think it was a little more than that
Okay.
because
But it was
enhancement
only like
guys,
10 dates a year, right?
there was a
It w
guarantee of use and there was a guarantee of money, but it was a little more than 150, and it may have been
but it was
more than
really
10
low, though.
dates. It
Yeah,
was. And I do know that the only one that signed a second contract was Tom Brandy, Salvatore Sincere. And that became a legitimate talent contract, not one of these hybrid contracts that they had brought up for these five guys. What they were really looking for was some experienced guys who could put over new talent, help teach them how to work, get them over on TV.
right.
And but of course, Vince being, controlly, he had to create gimmicks for everybody. Alex Porto was the one who just he was the pug, and I think it was just because
Right,
he looked like an amateur wrestler, a tough guy. And Wild Bill Irwin from Minnesota had played hockey, so they made him the goon.
right.
And Tracy Smothers, his name was Freddie Joe Floyd. And
Yeah.
where did the name come from? A lot of people have asked that over the years. And I
Is that a
loved it when,
Briscoe rib?
yep, a Briscoe rib.
Yeah.
And they asked, like Vince asked in one production meeting, knowing the answer, but wanting to put Jerry Briscoe on the spot. Freddie Joe Floyd, huh? As he's looking at the paper, down the glasses. Freddie Joe Floyd. Um, Jerry Briscoe, what was What was your brother's middle name? Uh, Freddie, Fred, Freddie Joe. Oh, what's your middle name? Floyd. Hmm. Ironic. Freddie Joe Floyd. Anyway, yeah. So it came from Jack's middle name and from Jerry Briscoe's middle name, and that's
Uh-huh.
Bruce. All of these. Okay, so if a wrestler had a goofy name, if you were the Red Rooster, if you were, you know, whatever, it was Bruce. Bruce Pritchard came up with some of the
Oh,
best.
really?
Yeah, that's his thing. He was just great at coming up with sometimes goofy, sometimes right on the mark. I have a feeling he came up with Paul Bearer. Just from a creative standpoint, the way his creative mind works, he was very good at coming up with names. Now, the Red Rooster, of course, was a shot on Terry Taylor because Bruce didn't like him. Nobody liked Terry. Well, a lot of people didn't like Terry. Um, and because he had, the big britches on in working for Cowboy Bill Watts, and there were a lot of bitter feelings and whatever.
Right.
But anyway, so that was Terry Taylor.
Successful guy in the business that had a lot of longevity for having so much heat.
Yeah.
Terry Taylor.
Amazing, right? And I of course became very close with Terry and still am to this day. And I never got it, but he said, "You better be careful hanging out with me because you're going to get heat." And I was like, "I don't care. I got heat already." And so Bruce took me to lunch one day and said, "You better not be hanging out with Terry Taylor. You're going to get heat. Why? Because he's got a lot of heat. Why? Well, because he's a heater. But why?" There was no answer. It
Oh,
just is what
really?
it is.
Just
It's just
because, yeah.
just because. Oh, okay. Well, I'll do that then. And
He used
almost
to
in
always
spite of
call
that.
me, "Oh, the world's strongest teenager."
Yeah.
Every time I'd hear it and know exactly it was Terry, you
Cro-
know?
Uh,
I wrestled him in a TV match once, and I'm like, "Oh, right," because this is back in the early '90s when I was doing, TV, and I was smaller, so a lot of it was just squash matches, you know? I had Dan Spivey, had Sid, I had you name it, I had them. Do Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. I had all those matches, and all of a sudden, it's Terrence Taylor. I'm like, "Oh, no shit. Oh, cool." So I'm like, "Hey," and it was right when he was starting to get a little push. And he's like,
yep.
"Well, kid, it's gonna like this. Something to the effect, we're gonna play ping pong. You're the ball, I'm the paddle. I'm just gonna keep on hitting you, and you're gonna go bouncing back and forth." I'm like, it was like a 7-minute match, So it was cool. It was easy, and that's I've told the story. That's how I had to wrestle Abdul the Butchers because Bagwell messed up the angle because they were shooting an angle at the end of the match, and I ended up wrestling Abdul the Butcher that night, which was in retrospect was really cool because now that they're all getting very old and a lot of those legends are passing away, it's cool that I was able to be in the ring, on national TV and wrestle against them and everything.
Sure.
And
And
I
at the
actually won the
time,
match.
right. And at the time, you're wondering how, okay, am I going to come out of this alive? Am I going to come out of this scarred for life? How's this going to
Yeah.
affect my bookings or whatever? And now you look back on it almost with pride, like, hey, this was pretty cool that I did this.
Yeah,
Especially
a
with
lot
the
of
way
people
you
can't
did,
say
where
that.
where you got a victory, you got your hand
Yes.
raised over Abdullah the Butcher and let the
Yeah.
record show. Terry Taylor was great because he called you the world's strongest teenager. Devin Storm, who wrestled there, is Crowbar. And he always Chris tells me he always called him, and he whenever Chris and I talk on the phone, he uses Terry Taylor's nickname for him. Kevin Crowballs here. It was just like if that was just Terry's way of being, charming or whatever. He was giving guys nicknames, and usually they were vulgar. So there you have it. When guys would get out of the business, that's one of the things. Like with what we learned from Sarge, that transition back into what they used to do isn't
Yeah.
too easy. I know
No,
Disco
not at all.
Inferno, for example. Disco had been involved in nightclubs and things like that before he got into wrestling and got into nightclub management, etc. After wrestling, he was very realistic about it. But that transition for a lot of guys is tough, man, because they
Yeah.
just can't switch their brain back.
Right. It's brutal. A lot of guys, they they end up it's like coming home from a war. They
Yeah.
just no one cares about you and you forgot about which is horrible. But that's what happens to a lot of the guys, they don't want to go back into the work world and you know get like take for instance that you talked about Chaz last week,
Yep.
Mosh from the Headbangers. He got out of the business. He was done. He still wrestles still and does his conventions and all that. He has a podcast he does and stuff like that. But he, works for a very big copy machine, and he worked his way all the way up into the company to where he's really high up and he does very
Yeah.
well for himself. But he was able to step away and do something. Some people can't make that transition. They just have to keep holding on and hoping that something's going to happen, that someone's going to call, and then they don't have a pot to piss in,
Right.
you know.
I know that,
And then you
uh
see him on GoFundMe asking,
yeah.
for for stuff and all that.
When both, Kamala and the one man gang, I know for a fact, were truck drivers, and I
Yeah.
think trucking is like a really good industry for independent guys to look to get into because you could make really good money. Most
Oh, they make a
truckers
great living. Yeah.
most truckers, it's, between 75 and 100 grand a year. And
Hmm.
if you're being an owner operator is not so great. And I know this because I work in the industry on the
I have
dispatch
a
end.
friend
That's
that's an owner operator. He's only home if his truck breaks down or if
yeah,
he needs maintenance. Otherwise, but his family lives a great living. He's just not a
sure.
part of it. He's
He
just making the money, sending it home.
that's what it is. But
Yeah.
if you're working for another company, you can kind of they may not have the openings right away, but and it's tough to get a Monday through Friday schedule. But if you can get, let's say, a 4 a.m. start time, with a local company, home every
Yeah.
night type of deal, you can wrestle
Mhm.
Friday night,
Yeah.
Saturday night. You can make those shows
Sure.
and go home, shower, and get in the truck. So it's a good thing to do. It's an industry that, of course, is starving for people, and truck driving schools are bending over backwards to have people to get into it. Um,
I
so
think
if I
Nasty Ned
was,
was a truck driver.
that's right, he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. I know Randy Fuller was in construction. Nasty Ned was a truck driver. I'm trying to think of like the IWF guys that when I broke in, a lot of them were, of course, the indie guys of the day who were getting,
Yeah.
their first sniff at being over on TV a little bit. Um,
Right.
did Cuban work? Cuban worked in bars. Was he like a, did he do bar management or restaurant work or something like that?
Um, I believe so. He has a bar right now in St.
Yeah,
Petersburg. Yeah.
I think something like that. And other guys, of course, are able to transition into the office, which is always nice. So, like,
My old
both.
partner Cliff was a repo man at Badcock's Furniture.
That's right. Did
I
that.
ended up with a lot of stuff
Yeah.
from there.
And again, that's hard work and work that
Yeah.
you're having to think on your feet,
Yep.
and you've got to make deals and you've got to be able to work with people, but be the one to command the situation. And Cliff's personality was such that it was intensified. When you were driving
Yep.
cab, you probably had to put on a different face every time somebody else got in the cab because you didn't know
Sure.
the
Yeah.
situation that you were going to be in, right?
Yeah. I mean, every you had. It's funny is I went through phases where I would um completely basically working on the business, like having different personalities, having being a different person, having a different backstory, just making stuff up on the fly.
Right.
Like, yeah, I'm this and that. The craziest things, most bizarre things you ever heard, that was me as the cab driver. And they're like, oh my gosh. But it was me learning how to, you know, be out there and
Mhm.
because I'd have to answer their questions. 'Cause they all would have a million questions when you tell them, "Yeah, I used to do." I can't even think of the most bizarre, craziest things you ever. Say for instance, yeah, I used to be a roadie for Kiss. Oh my God, and then you just make up stuff.
Yeah,
So I would do stuff like it makes the night go faster.
you're right.
You're getting some kind of a bond with the customer, so you're hoping that is going to make the chances of getting a tip a little bit better. And you're learning. You're just learning how to work people. And it's all related. It goes back into wrestling.
Right. As Casey's driving
Telling a
from
story.
the Parliament House on OBT to Paramore
Oh my
Street,
God.
trying not to get shot, you know? It's
Wow. OBT, the Parliament House.
that's right. So,
Yeah,
you know,
I don't mean to
allegedly there
tip
was
that bad.
hey, listen, allegedly there was some wild activities in the Parliament House. That was always like the big rib of the day, because
I
folks
w I
in
have
the
a rib.
80s and 90s, that was the Parliament
No,
House
no,
was the big gay
I
bar.
have a
That's
Parliament House story.
oh, good. Let's hear the Parliament House story.
Okay, so, a couple guys were coming into town to wrestle, they wanna know a good place to stay. They're working for the weekend. I'm like, "Oh,
Yes.
man, this great hotel called the Parliament House." "Oh,
Tremendous.
yeah." I said, "Cheap rooms, like $60 a night," so they got a couple rooms, they all hung out and everything, and they went to the pool. There's nothing going on during the daytime. They came to the show, they went back, they're walking around doing like I said, "Yeah, there's a club there, all kinds of stuff, restaurants. You'll love it." And they're like, "Oh." They're like walking around. This is from the story that was told me afterwards. They're like, "There are not many girls at this place." You know? They're looking around, they're like, "What the fuck?" They realize this eats a couple
A
guys
like
making out.
yeah,
They sent me to a gay club, gay establishment,
a gay
and they
hotel.
have to stay there because they're not going to go get another hotel because they already checked in, paid their money for the room and everything.
Right.
So that was one of the ribs I pulled on the boys. I was very happy about that. I thought it was great.
That's what we used
Because
to
there's
always
some
say,
guys that
could be, go be a pool boy at the Parliament House. You'll
yeah,
make some good tips, that type of stuff.
yeah.
Anybody who's looking for work. But
I do know there's wrestlers, and I think Bagwell and Scotty Riggs might have been two of them that I heard about. And in their day, that they had to go do dancing, male
oh
dancers, and they
yeah.
would dance at gay clubs to make a great living.
Kenny King was a Chippendale dancer for a
Oh
number of
wow,
years. Yeah. And he got Rhett Titus into it when I was in Ring of
Ring of
Honor
Honor,
with them. Yeah.
yeah.
And 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 then of course now Kenny is, he's not wrestling anymore. He'll still wrestle occasionally, but he's very active in Hollywood. He was on The Bachelorette. He said that's the biggest work that there is, any of those shows.
Oh
It's a
yeah,
bigger work than wrestling. And there were some guys, Casey, who, like you said, you were doing getting acting gigs. Back in the day, there were a bunch of the boys who were regulars on Jerry Springer, right?
yeah, yeah. I did it once.
Did
Yeah,
you?
Chris Nelson was
Yep.
the jobber booker for Jerry Springer. I was watching it one day and I'm like, I was living. I had a roommate and he loved Asian women, right? He's like, "Point down," and he's in his room, I'm in my room, and I'm watching Jerry Springer, and I'm like, this midget just did a incredible swan dive onto the cake, perfect form. And then there's an Asian girl on it, and he's like, I heard "bling dong" through the whole house and everything, right? And I'm like, wait a second, I know them. He's like, no, get out of here. I said, I swear to God, I know them. And come to find out, um, Chris Chris Nelson was booking all the boys.
Yep.
You got paid 250. You got to go up to Chicago for a couple days. Drove around in a limo, free food and everything, in and out. You got to be on TV, and you talk about some of the most bizarre storylines you ever heard in your life. And I think it all ended when one of my old partners, the Blackheart, Dave Johnson, the security guy, Steve, kept on saying, "Okay, all right, you got to make it look real. You got to make it look real." And he like if you tell me one more time to make it look real, I'm gonna beat the living shit out of you, right? And he kept on telling them. So when it was time, Dave made it look real, and he got Steve down and just shot on him and wouldn't let Steve up. And they're like, "All right, we're gonna change it. No more of the boys are coming in.
Yeah.
Leave it to the boys to ruin something that's good.
I always would say that,
You've
but,
seen it a million times.
we had a great hotel set up, and, of course, the boys had to ruin it for the boys. Always.
Yeah,
Damn it. But, yeah, there was guys that
yeah,
were Scoot Andrews was a regular on there. It was like a whole
yeah.
host of Florida enhancement talent was
Yeah, Buckthorn
regulars.
Maine.
Yeah, and those guys were on there, and one week it would be my baby daddy has done something, and then the next time they would be on, my significant other is into weird stuff or whatever the
Yeah,
topic du jour was, and you had to go and be that character, and
yeah,
it was incredible. I do know one of my favorite episodes of
yeah,
Springer was when Bill Dundee and Jamie Dundee were on. That was awesome because that was
yeah,
kind of like half shoot, half work, and they were on there as father and son, so they were working the gimmick, but at the same time it was all very real because
yeah.
Jamie had a
Yeah,
ton of problems and wasn't, and he and Bill were on the outs, and it was just like,
yeah.
man, it was fireworks. It was awesome television. They couldn't wait for each commercial break to come back.
It was more than Jerry Springer. He had people. Remember Bobby Rogers
The promoter
from
from Florida.
ran FOW wrestling
Yeah,
down in
yeah,
South
yeah.
Florida. Yeah, he actually sent me a text message. Might have been about a year ago. He's like, "Hey, do you have a significant other or someone that wants to go on like one of these court shows and sue each other and come up with something over a wrestling belt? They threw it away and sue them for $6,000. They'll pay you this and that." He was on Judge Wapner. He was you remember the Bruce Owens, the referee that used
Yeah.
to referee for me. He was on it and had a one of the court shows over wrestling belts. And Judge Wapner, Judge Judy, all those shows, Judge Joe Brown, all of them had something going on.
Tommy Dreamer told me, because when Tommy Dreamer came into the talent relations department in WWE, um, well, before that, I was doing it, right? And he eventually became the guy that was getting the
Right.
tapes. But in ECW, he was the guy that was getting the tapes. And this, of course,
Yeah.
is in the real wild late '90s, late
Mm.
'90s era of ECW. And he said, "Kevin, you can't believe," he's like, "Oh man, that you must see a lot of wild stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, the 450-pound guy with no shirt flexing, that type of stuff." And he's like,
Mm.
"That's nothing like what I've seen in ECW." I was like, "Oh man, I could imagine." He says, "You know Bobby Rogers?" I said, "The promoter from Florida?" "Yeah." He sent a tape in where he said he was going to
Chop
cut his
off.
right his pinky.
Yep.
What the
And they were
hell?
gonna. He was gonna do it, but Paul Heyman was like, it was almost too much for them.
Yeah,
This is Bobby Rogers that was selling his kidney on eBay.
right.
All right, Bobby, if you listen, we got to have you on the show because we had to talk about some of these crazy things that the
Yeah,
boys
listen,
go through.
I wanna hear these real stories. I need to know.
Oh, and
Like
Bobby, trust me, Bobby has them all to this day. It's crazy. He knew all the scams the boys were doing. Stealing credit cards and running wrestling shows off of Bobby Heenan's credit card.
oh my gosh. I know that, like, Mark Briscoe, Mark Briscoe had gotten his 2 front teeth knocked out when he took a bump, hit the back of his head, his teeth came out. Um, he tried to sell them on eBay, and eBay said no. eBay
Yeah,
would not allow the sale of he's like, "It's just teeth. They're not in my mouth." It's,
those guys were
and
wild, bro.
I remember
Remember
when you booked them.
for the Lords of the Ring?
Holy yeah, and
I
so I
drove
had
into the
kinda
airport the next morning,
brother,
and I'm
did
sitting there. and they're where they're Delaware, they're, like, in the woods
Yeah.
of Delaware where they're from,
Slow
and their
low I mean,
accent is
lower Delaware.
so yeah, so thick, and I heard it was a Snapple, and the Snapple used to have something in there, and he'd read it and say, "Oh, Mark, well, I'll be damned. If it's in the Snapple can, you know it's real.
That's
It's
right.
on the Snapple lid." And I'm sitting there doing like, "What is going on,
Yeah. It
Kevin?"
was they were, they it was like and God bless them, especially as they were when they were young. Um, one of the questions that was asked earlier in the chat, and I can't access it right now, was who was the drunkest wrestler you ever saw? My
Oh
nominee would
wow.
have to be Jay Briscoe, God rest his soul, because Jay could drink like there was no tomorrow and would be just either belligerent, funny belligerent, rude belligerent, but he had like an alter ego that would come out late at night, very early in the morning, that we affectionately called Dickhead Guy. And
Oh
because he
wow.
would, yeah. Do you know, Kevin? Yeah. Do you know that my brother is a homosexual? No, he's not a homosexual. Mark, he's married. Mark is married. And would just go on. And so we'd be on the shuttle bus going to the rental car return and be like, people would be looking like, what is this guy? Oh, he's fine. He's just going to go back to sleep in a little bit. And
Mm.
but yeah, when it came to putting him away, I remember Mark one time or Jay Mark and Jay were in the Tokyo Dome Hotel. And so we were in their room, or we were in Mark's room. Even though Mark and Jay were brothers, when you got booked for New Japan, you got your own room. And every room at the Tokyo Dome Hotel had two beds, but the other bed would just be where you put your suitcase or whatever. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the boys had just flown in and everybody's having a couple of drinks and nothing crazy is going on. But Mark is now sleeping and Jay is getting to that point, right? So me and Cheeseburger and Jeff Jones are in the room and we see Mark just kind of laying there on his bed in his room. He's starting to go to sleep. And hey, Burger, who's 120 pounds, drop an elbow on Mark. It'll be funny. Yeah, oh, I don't know. And of course, Jay's the one who jumps up on the other bed. And I'm expecting, the ha ha funny elbow. No. Jay jumped as high as he possibly could, scraped the ceiling of the Tokyo Dome Hotel, and came raining down with, God's
Wow.
fury with an elbow right to the center of his brother's chest.
Macho
And Mark,
Man.
his all the air shoots out of his body. And he comes blowing out of the bed, and me and Jefford Berger are standing there like, oh my God. And he's ready to kill his brother. And Jay's like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And then Mark looks at us and says, y'all need to get out of my room. And then, the story was that uh later on, because Tessa Blanchard was there, she was dating Ricochet at the time. And so they were in their room together. Um, and when she got up at like 6 in the morning to go to the gym, because she was wrestling for Stardom, that she came out in the hallway and there was Jay Briscoe asleep in the hallway. And so she went back into the room. She got the extra blanket and pillow from the extra bed and put it under Jay's head and covered him with the blanket and went to work out. It was like, oh, that was so nice of you.
Wow. We've had it where we've guys been passed out in the on the rollaway bed, and we like, all right, you know what? You passed out. You're on the rollaway bed. Take him to the parking lot. Put him in a parking spot in the
Oh.
bed, and all of a sudden it had a snowstorm at night. They wake up with a couple inches of snow on them, all freezing half to death. They look up and they're outside in the middle of the parking lot. You know.
That is tremendous. We got a question here from BD04, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about, which he says, but with Naito leaving New Japan Pro Wrestling, Naito related stories that are notable, and what do you recommend he do now that he is freelancing? Those are great questions. Obviously, first thing Tetsuya Naito needs to do is get healthy, because he has had multiple surgeries on his eye.
Oh
Um,
wow.
he gets terrible double vision, so when
Mm.
he's trying to do anything, and if he's trying to hit the ropes, he sees, multiple sets of ropes of different
Wow.
distances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, And, so depth perception is an issue, double, triple vision is an issue. He keeps going back in. They keep retightening muscles or whatever it is, and they can't get the situation fixed. He also has a chronic knee issue. Um, and they're doing, I know, like platelet rich therapy with his knee. Um, it kind of is what it is. First thing he needs to do is get healthy. Then after that, of course, survey the landscape. I think if he never wrestles again, that's okay. He's given enough of his body for the business. But if he wants to come back and pick his shots here and there, be a special attraction for any of the companies, he could do that. He could run his own shows, which is now a very common thing with guys doing, whether it was Taichi or Taka Michinoku, Hiromu, Takahashi, they've all done their own shows. And, so if a Tetsuya Naito show ran, he could have a whole host of guys from any company come in and work for him. So I think that's probably what he should do. But Tetsuya Naito was such a character. He, again, his English was very limited, but then again, my Japanese was very limited. So one night he says to me, Kevin-san, why you no learn Japanese? I said, Naito-san, it's very hard. I have old brain.
Oh
I
my
can't.
god, it's very
He's like,
difficult.
yeah. He's like, no, no, you don't try. You don't try. I said, okay, I'll try. I promise. And we were in Osaka, and then we had like a day off. And then the next part of the tour starts Tuesday night. We're at Korakuen Hall. And as was often the case, Naito comes out for his entrance and he would stop and talk to me. Of course, now I'm doing English commentary, and now he wants me to speak Japanese, right? Nihongo, Nihongo,
Konnichiwa.
yeah, speak, speak. And all I could remember, and on the spur of the moment, was what was the slogan, the phrase I came up with? I wanted to go to the, I wanted to be driven to the domestic terminal for whatever ANA kokunai sen onegashimasu. Uh, he's like, oh, sugoi. I was like, and I looked at Chris Charlton. I was like, that's all I could think about. That was all I knew how to say. ANA onegashimasu. ANA kokunai sen onegashimasu. Take me to the domestic terminal at ANA, please.
Oh wow.
Japanese is impossible. I could never wrap
Oh,
my
it's a
head
very
around it.
tough language.
The
Yeah.
end of the sentence is the beginning, and the beginning is the end. And
It
when
took
you,
me forever to learn how to say konnichiwa kiko-san.
yeah,
You know, to
konnichiwa.
some yeah, it
Ha,
took me like an hour to learn the one word.
Hajimama stay every time you go into a convenience store. Hajimama stay, Hajimama stay. So you know that, welcome, welcome to the store type of thing. You know how to say thank you. You learn how to, oh, how gozaimasu, good morning, that type of thing. And one of the best, most used phrases that you can use in Japan is daijabu, because daijabu means no problem, it's okay, forgiveness, don't worry about it, whatever you want it to mean, it's very applicable. And you can always say thank you and you can always say please. And if that's the Japanese that you're pretty much covered, you know.
Right.
Ego, ego, I forget what the word for menu was, but we wanted an English menu, please. And sometimes you'd be in a restaurant and they would have an English menu, sometimes they wouldn't, depended on where you were. Further away from Tokyo, less English was spoken, and more likely you were to get the one night Don Callis and I were in we were in Sapporo and we were trying to go to get something to eat after one of the shows, and we walked in to a bar restaurant type of thing that wasn't far from the hotel, and one guy who was at the door said Japanese only, and he held out his hand like back towards the door, and we were like, "Oh, okay, no problem. We'll see you,"
Wow.
and walked out backwards. It was like, "Ooh, man."
I'll tell you a funny story is when Dave Johnson was part of the Blackhearts and he was with Tom Nash. You remember
Yeah.
Tom Nash?
Oh, sure.
They were over in Japan. They were for New Japan, and they were with you know Gordy and Hanson, all them and everything. And Tom was like telling Dave, yeah, they all speak English. They all speak English. And Dave's like, no, I said, no, watch. So they get their food and everything. and they pay for it, and they put barely any money down. So, okay, no problem, thank you. You keep the change, and they're like, oh, no, 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 you owe more money. And he's like, see, they all speak English. So it was a story he'd always tell.
Tom Nash got Dave Johnson a lot of heat over there. Tom Nash had, my God, he had enormous heat. There's video of him just getting, they beat the hell out of him. Just blood
Oh yeah,
gushing through the
you can see the
Blackheart's
blood
mask.
through the mask.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
geez. Was that, I think it was like Hanson and, was it Hanson and Gordy or Hanson and Doc? I can't remember what combination it was.
Hanson and
Maybe,
Gordy.
yeah. Oh,
And Dave said they
brother.
went to the back, and he said, I never said a word. I just said, thank you. Everything okay? And they're like, yep. He said, I didn't complain one bit.
No, because that was rough. But those are the things, again, that's the business taking care of itself. That's the boys policing the boys. And a
Correct.
lot of times it could have been because you were rude to someone or you were rude to a sponsor or you were doing something that was going to affect their business. Um,
Right.
and those things get taken care of. Sammy Callahan was on one tour of New Japan. Didn't go very well. Ray Rose said it was the Sammy Callahan series of unfortunate events. The whole tour was just one situation after another. And we were joking about it by the end of the tour. And it was just like, because he got drunk, he was in a cab. He tried to exit the cab, but he was sitting on the passenger side and they locked that door. The driver has the ability because they don't want people running out. Um,
Yeah.
they have the ability to lock and unlock the door. So when they unlock it, it's always to this side because to the driver's side because they put you on the sidewalk. They don't want you getting out in the middle of traffic.
Right.
And so as that door opens, Sammy's trying to get out on this side and he's hammered and doesn't know his own strength and rips the handle off the door. Well, he just leaves it and he gets out of the cab and he goes upstairs to the hotel, and then the hotel, is there with the cops at like 9 o'clock the next morning looking for him because he had to pay for the
Oh,
damaged cab.
wow.
Then another situation, he was in the ring with Minoru Suzuki was the tag team partner, and I can't remember off the top of my head the older wrestler that he was in the ring with. Anyway, older guy charges in and is expecting the boot, but the way Sammy does it, like he pushes the boot forward, so he jammed the neck of the
Ooh.
senpai, and
Yeah.
he went numb, had a real bad stinger, and he
Mm.
was,
Mm.
boy, oh boy, he was hot. And Sammy was trying to apologize in the locker room, was legitimately, honestly apologetic, but because of the language barrier, as he was like putting his hands behind his back, like trying to be as, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. This guy took it as a threat. Like you're basically you
Oh,
want to fight
wow.
me. You don't think I'm tough enough to kick your ass here in the locker room. And eventually, somebody came over and was like, "You need to stop. Just get out of the room, Sammy. You need to just go because you're going to
Yeah.
get killed."
Yeah.
And it was just like that the whole tour. It just whether it was the language barrier, trying too hard to get over, trying too hard to fit in, it was just a mess.
Wow. Mm.
So you never know where these things can happen. But this has been a Casey, another fascinating conversation, and we never know where these conversations are going to go.
It
Uh,
went a little everywhere today.
Yeah, but that's the best part about this show. I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about enhancement guys, the in-ring wrestling talent and what they did for work outside of wrestling, and we learned about second careers and side hustles and everything else that you guys
Yeah.
did, and we spread some gossip and some rumors about others, and hopefully it gets picked up and goes viral here on social media. Speaking of social media, of course, you can continue to follow us, whether it's on X, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you find us. There's a posting of clips constantly on YouTube, and there's just a ton of great content that we've done now here in our
Yeah.
second season of the In Ring Wrestling Podcast. Next week, Casey, are we going to have another guest, or are we moving on from him?
Um, when he comes on to be a guest, it will be a special guest, and it'll be a
Okay.
surprise to all of us because it probably will be a last minute thing. I can work on a guest for next week. Um, One thing I do want to talk about in the very near future, because when I'm on YouTube looking around, I see it comes up a lot. Different things about New Jack, a very
Ooh,
controversial
you got a
character.
bunch of New Jack stories. You want to talk about him next week?
Sure, and because New Jack was one of my mainstay regulars when I ran my television show with MXPW in um, it seems like every promoter, including Paul Heyman, had an issue with New Jack except for me.
You were the New
I never
Jack
had a
whisperer.
problem.
You were the New Jack whisperer. You had a bond with him that no one else did. And I always was like, I don't know, Casey. I don't know if this is a good idea. Don't worry about it. He'll be fine. And he was always fine. And I would be like, I don't know how you do it. I've never seen anybody be able to have that kind of relationship rapport with
Yeah.
New Jack the way you did. So yeah, let's talk about him next week. He's such a
Okay.
fascinating character,
Oh yeah.
larger than life figure, and all of the stories that you hear are true. So that's the best
Oh
part.
yeah. They seem so bizarre and so far fetched that you're like, you got to be just full of shit. There's no way it's true.
Yeah,
But 99% of every New Jack story is true. And if they even make up one, it probably happened anyhow, knowing New
yeah.
Jack.
It might just get a little embellished, but the facts are there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible. So we'll talk about New Jack next week. We'll work on getting some guests here, and you never know who could pop up here on the In Ring Wrestling Podcast. So I hope thank you very much for joining us live. If you missed it live, of course, it's available in full form, podcast wherever you get them, and of course on YouTube and throughout social media. So that will do it for this edition of the In Ring Wrestling Podcast. For our host Casey Thompson, I'm Kevin Kelly, and we'll see everybody next time.